Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Alexandra Blair. I am the project manager for the Google Podcast Creator Program. I work with the PRX training team. I'd like to say, for accessibility reasons, I am a millennial-ish aged white woman sitting on a highly impractical green velvet couch with some artfully arranged, also very impractical throw pillows around me. And also for accessibility reasons, this webinar will be transcribed and posted to our website later with closed captioning and a transcription that is screen reader accessible. The webinar will last for about 45 minutes, so you can pace yourself and let's dive right in. Thank you again for joining us. As you have seen on the registration page, this webinar is really about all things Google Podcast Creator Program. So we are really here today to celebrate what we've done for the past 3 years of this program and to clue you guys in on some of the insights and things that we've learned from working with independent podcasters across the world for the past 3 years. Um, if you're on this webinar, chances are that you know who PRX is. If you don't, welcome anyway. From our early days disrupting public radio airwaves with increased access to new voices, PRX has really become a field leader in podcasting. And in many ways, we helped launch the podcast revolution. And now we find that we are happy to say that we're leading its evolution. And we really believe that by giving independent creators affordable access to training and tools that help them create better, easier. They monetize, they can engage with new audiences. So, with all of our tools, we ensure that podcasting remains open and accessible. These are really big goals to us. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the webinar. But uniquely with the Google program, we're able to make a commitment to accessibility for new voices that are genuinely expanding the field and not just American voices, not just English speaking voices. And so we not only build the technology that empowers creators to monetize their work, but we are really creating a training curriculum that does the same and spreads our values of openness and accessibility and privacy to every corner of our domestic market, but also outward into rapidly expanding markets. And so the Google Podcast Creator Program, as you see on this slide, it really is a mentorship-based podcast accelerator. It's grounded in design thinking and community building, building those cohorts of peers from the international podcasting community, and the development of free and accessible evergreen resources for creators worldwide. We really took this program as an opportunity to create resources that were going to help everyone and not just those who participate in the program. So if we dig in a little bit, the Google Podcast Creator Program is, yes, part accelerator. The accelerator is a multi-week training, really along the spirit of that word, accelerator. We get a vibrant cohort of international creators together in a room and we say, like, what is possible? We help them through intensive and rigorous curriculum. I've seen some alumni in the chat today, so they can vouch for the fact that it's hard work, but it's really good work and their podcasts are so much stronger for it. To date, we've had over 13,000 applications from around 118 different countries come in for this program. And across our 5 cohorts, we've served 64 individual creators and 32 podcasts. That's just part of the program, though, and we'll dig in a moment. But we also have hosted a lot of different open to the public events. This is something that we're able to do through this really generous grant funding from Google. You might have heard about the program through one of our more popular events called Audio Recess. This was a podcast unconference. It was very much inspired by the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and we hosted this all-day global virtual festival that really was aimed at skill sharing and sharing resources, building that international community of audio makers. Many of you are from that community if you're here, if you received our email, and that's how you got here. We really are investing in creator economies across the world. So for the unconference, we had 847 attendees from 61 countries, and we had 10 different sessions on everything from storytelling to personal voice branding to even a guided meditation. So that was a really awesome event that we're taking a lot of cues from now that we're able to return to some more in-person gatherings. The Google Podcast Creator Program, though, also has this really awesome suite of evergreen resources that we've designed, and that includes the Podcast 101 video series. We made 10 different videos with Google that are really geared towards early stage podcasting, teaching core skills. If you go to the next slide, Tony. We have 10 different videos. They exist now in 18 languages. I'm proud to say we just added our 18th and translated those videos into Swahili. They have 150,000 or more views, and it comes with a companion course and all kinds of resources. We'll drop the link to the Podcast 101 series in the chat. Again, chances are if you're here, you're well aware of that video series. They've helped a lot of people, and it really is a good bar setting tool for early stage podcasters who are still thinking, is a podcast what I want to make? Or am I just bored during COVID? Which is a really important question that we encourage people to answer early on before they endure the pain of podcasting for a long time. We also have an open webinar series. So to date, we've had 11 public webinars. We've had many more semi-public webinars that are open to the Google Podcast Creator Program alumni or other training team alumni. These are really educational mini series. We do them in 3 or 4 at a time in a sort of a date cluster. There's going to be more of those coming up this year that we're going to be publicizing. We've had about 2,500 attendees, probably more than that considering the past few that we did. And we do all kinds of things. We bring industry experts in to answer questions. Sometimes they're delivering workshops on sound or tone. And always they're just sharing helpful tips and insights from their time spent in this complicated and delightful industry. We also are working towards making all of our webinars more accessible. As you heard at the top of this one, we are transcribing, adding closed captioning, and also doing screen reader friendly transcriptions for our webinars, just like this one, and putting them up on our website so that people can access our tools. That's a renewed and always very important thing to us. So let's dig a little deeper into the accelerator and talk about that and talk about what we've learned from running this accelerator for 3 years now. So the accelerator always begins with an open call. And for us, this is a really exciting thing. It's our most open call. So we don't even ask for, domestic podcasts. In the past couple of years, we haven't even asked for an existing podcast. We've just said, hey, people with good ideas from the world over, flock to this program and pitch your ideas to us, and we're going to help you develop them. We are able to cast a really, really wide net, and it's been allowing us to discover these bright spots the world over. We pluck these little teams working in isolation across the world and connect them to each other. And it's really beautiful to see podcasters from Spain connecting with podcasters from Turkey, connecting with podcasters from Argentina, and creating these vibrant international cohorts of people who are kind of groupthink, problem solving, podcast issues and pain points that are facing creators in these emerging markets. We also, through the Podcast Creator Program, have a renewed and intensive focus on creating these open source resources, which is something that PRX has always done, but it's really especially important to this program, using this Google seed funding to create resources that are not just helping people who participate in our program, but knowing actively that those who participate in our accelerator are going to turn around, they're going to bring what they've learned right back home with them. And so a big part of this program is also creating those rhetorical frameworks so that people can return home and take authentic language to explain what they've learned to others and spread that knowledge. We hope to, in that way, really inspire the people who participate in this program and get some visibility into this program. And as you might hear from my passion and also from the way that the program was designed, we really have a deep investment in our teams and across the teams. We really work to systematically build this wide network of alumni who form this global podcasting community. Many of them are in the chat. I saw you guys. Hello. I love seeing you guys show up at the webinars. I love checking in. I love hearing from my teams. We'll talk a little bit about the mentors in a moment, but I, as the program manager, also do a lot of direct one-on-one mentorship with my teams. And so a lot of these creators become my friends and become people whose professional and creative development I really am invested in. And it creates this very unique, deep investment from our team that I think is unique among podcast trainings. It's not what you're going to get elsewhere. If we look at a map of the creator program, we've received, like I said before, more than 13,000 applications from 118 countries. This right here is a map of teams that we have trained. And many of those training teams come from places that we have identified as bright spots. So while this is a map of where we have trained, we have bright spots all over the world. The US obviously is a well-developed podcast market. We've got Canada and Mexico and Brazil that are burgeoning podcast ecosystems. Also places like Costa Rica, Cuba, Argentina, Colombia, also in Africa, Nigeria, Zambia, Kenya, Egypt, and all across the world. I could go on and on. Spain, France, Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, Indonesia, Taiwan. There are bright spots and emerging podcast ecosystems the world over that we're really interested in investing in and equipping creators from those regions to handle the concerns of an emerging ecosystem. If we look at those creators, I just couldn't miss an opportunity to put their lovely faces up on my screen. If you go to the next one, Tony, we trained 64 podcasters from 32 different podcasts over 3 years and really watched them mature in their processes and their ideas. Each one of these people that I have trained means so much to me, and I could talk about their individual pivots and the way that their concepts have strengthened throughout the accelerator, and the way that I've seen their audiences and their concepts grow has been super meaningful. You can definitely check out all of our alumni on the Google Podcast Creator Program website. I will also not miss this opportunity to shout out a brand new website that our team has been working pretty tirelessly on. And it looks awesome. You can check out all of the alumni and see what they've got from the program and kind of see where they are now. Speaking of mentorship, we have a really, really unique cohort of mentors for this program. So a shift in language for us. We previously talked about, this cohort of people as advisors. There are definitely still advisors and advisory board members among the mentors, but we also have a lot of mentors who show up to do one-on-one direct mentorship or lead really intensive workshops or kind of come to knowledge share and pipe drop, industry insights that they've been working on for years and years and years. I'm thinking of Lauren Silverman, who has this awesome doc that she uses at Gimlet to create every single Gimlet show, who shared that with our team. Or, um, we recently got the scripts for Winds of Change podcast to share with our podcasters so they could see what a script really looks like. So we have a lot of mentors that work in different capacities with our teams. And you can check out the mentors on the website as well. The Google Podcast Creator Program, I think, we regularly hear that this program is life changing for people and transformative. And I think this quote from a participant from our second round really gets to the core spirit of our trainings. This feeling is one that we actively try to foster in each cohort, definitely of the Google Podcast Creator Program, but also other training programs that we run. But there is this feeling of connection when I can see myself reflected in each and every one of my cohort, and I felt empowered. I felt as part of a larger thing, as part of a community of creators and podcasters, and I felt a sense of belonging with people I have never met before. And that was from Adrienne Zambrano, who was a part of the podcast Valle de Cielo Gris. And I think that really gets at what we're going for here. I'll also share another quote from James Boo, who I'll be presenting with at Podcast Movement Evolutions a little later this week to do a similar sort of GPcp reveal to the world. What have we learned over these past few years, and try to share with some podcasters some tools. But he said, I've been in accelerator programs before. It became pretty clear to me that you're actually there for the organization to use. And that's just simply not the case here. And that's something we really, really pride ourselves on at the Google Podcast Creator Program and at PRX in general with all of our trainings. If you go to the next slide. So, thinking back about these creators, and at the end of this second round of our highly successful program, we really asked ourselves, why? Why are we doing this program? This is like a normal process for us to sit back and reflect when we're done with some big endeavor that we've been planning for a long time. We have what we call a retrospective. And so we asked ourselves, why? Why are we doing this program? Why are we doing this program? Why us? Why now? Is this relevant? And what we realized is that this is actually a time when podcasters really need more resources than ever before. And especially in the American market, we're facing massive oversaturation. And honestly, the biggest problem that American podcasters are facing is curation and breaking out, how to make your show stand out. But in the international markets, especially, new money and new opportunities are really flowing into those international markets. And podcasters who've been working in those new markets for a long time really need um, they really need tools to equip them to deal with that kind of mid-career phase and to level up. We're going to talk a little bit about leveling up and what that looks like and what pain points international podcasters are still facing in just a minute here. But basically, that's really who we were talking about. And joining us now, perfect timing from her, in fact, a little bit to talk about why now, why this program is so relevant, and what's going on in the industry that justifies how awesome this program is our PRX's very own CEO, Carrie Hoffman. Hello, Kerri. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, hi, nice to see you. I'm a little distracted by my own photo there. Everything changes so much in the pandemic.
I know I wasn't quite sure which one to use, so I went
No,
podcast garage background.
yeah, exactly. It's like a little trip down pre-pandemic memory lane. That's
Mine
all
was too.
good.
Yeah.
Uh, well, I'm so excited to join and talk a little bit about why PRX believes in this program, why we've invested in it, and why we think it's had like an amazing impact so far. And Alexandra, I'm going to let you're driving the slide. So if you can kind of go to the first slide there, I would really appreciate it. So one of the things that I think that helpful context for uh, why we invested in training and why we believe in its impact is to just take a step back and look at how the landscape has changed over the last couple of years. And so if you can go to that first slide there. So here's a little bit of a trivia question. How many podcasts were there in the Apple directory, which is really the most significant index for podcasts? And I'm sure there are some legitimate guesses out there, but we know the answer. And because PRX has been podcasting for so long, it's around 110,000. And if we flash forward in time to today and really looking at where we are in terms of the number of podcasts that are in that Apple directory right now, you can see that it is over 2 million. This has been reported widely. So if we put all this together, it's really a 20 times increase in a very short amount of time. So what does that mean? What does it mean if you're an independent podcaster? What does it mean if you're non-US based? How do you make sense of something that has really exploded? And if you really go back in time, podcasting has grown a pretty steady 20%. But when you get into these last couple of years, that exponential growth is really what is most significant. And it's not just the number of podcasts; it's the number of newsletters, it's the number of training programs, it's the number of advertisers. You know, when we launched Radiotopia in 2014, we really had to explain what a podcast was to most buyers. We would have industry meetings, and there would really only be one representative from the advertising agency, the whole advertising sector, I guess I really should say. And so this has been a lot of change in a very short amount of time. And it became very clear to PRX that when you have something that grows so fast, um, well, success favors those already successful. And so, how do we do the important field building work to make sure that there's a rich and vibrant and open ecosystem around podcasting? One of the ways that we do that is really through training. Um, Go ahead, Alexandra, you can go to that next slide. And so, um, we've been in podcasting since 2003. And so that first wave was really a technical wave, getting an MP3 enclosure to an RSS feed. Then the launch of the iTunes store and the launch of the the iPhone was a total game changer because there was a way for us to find more readily what we were looking for. Still very early days, still a committed group of listeners who were willing to wade through a lot of friction in the process. But the release of the iPhone, I think everybody knows, was a game changer. And, you know, one of the things that a lot of people point to in the podcast industry is the launch of Serial being like the significant content moment. But I've really come to understand that having great content alone isn't enough. You actually have to have um, a frictionless way to get at that content. So the combination of Apple deciding to put the podcast app on the home screen is part of the operating system, so it can't be easily deleted. Even though people have many choices as to where to listen, it's really embedded into the operating system. And so the combination of Serial and that frictionless experience was really what opened the floodgates. And because serial was serial and serialized, it meant that people kept coming back. What is going to happen next week? What's going to happen next week? And so all media, we've known this for a long time, is habit. And so now we're, I think, pretty solidly in that 20 times growth and the fourth wave, which is, there's been about $2.8 billion worth of acquisitions in the last 3 years in podcasting. The headlines would make it feel like that's a lot of content acquisitions, but really most of the consolidation has been in taking, big tech companies kind of converting country lanes in podcasting into highways. And it's mostly on the ad tech side. And it does put pressure on the open ecosystem because that $2.8 billion is there's got to be a return on that significant investment. And some of that will be on the ease of kind of making sure that the ad product is is efficient. That's one area. But the other way is, and part of the content consolidation has been that uh, the interest is really in successful shows, shows that are already successful or being purchased. So if you've been making a podcast for 10 years, you're not quite sure of the value. Maybe you quit your job to make it or something like that. Like the idea that there would ever be such a significant payout and exit strategy for your podcast, that actually didn't exist 5 years ago. And so that's become more commonplace, but still, even with the possibility of that, the acquisitions and stuff are still minimal. I could name them in about 5 minutes, the content ones. Most of that consolidation has been in technology and ad servicing. And so what that means for us as a company, and I think this is really part of the good news, is that there is all of this consolidation, but organizations like PRX that are interested in growing a healthy and rich ecosystem that is global in nature and also gives people the tools they need so that they can grow and succeed. In those early days of podcasting, it was very common. This is really why we formed Radiotopia, is because we witnessed that many of those early stage podcasts would grow to a certain level and they would just stall and they couldn't break through that plateau. And so our response to that was, okay, well, maybe we pull some together and we do some back office support for them. We help centralize ad sales, we centralize technology support, et cetera. And now, very soon after that, when we opened up a local community-based studio, what we thought we were opening was a studio for people that were already in the podcast industry and we could give them like co-working space, et cetera. But what happened was far more interesting and exciting, which is that we had people come in literally through an open door that had never been part of the podcast industry and were really interested either to be active listeners, make something themselves, turn their hobby into a profession. And so early on in those days, PRX really changed what we were doing in those community-based studios. And it was very clear to us that we actually had an opportunity here to create a curriculum, put structure around it, help adult learners be better at something that was naturally hard and confusing, especially finding your way through these waves, et cetera. And that we had an opportunity to also if consolidation was really favoring the already successful, well, then we have an opportunity to help newcomers be successful on their own terms. And maybe an exit strategy isn't part of their equation. Maybe it is. That's for them to decide. But what we can do is help diversify, help fill the industry, and then help satisfy a skill gap and use our understanding over these years of podcasting, which is this combination of monetization, technology, and excellent content. Like, oh, what are those? How can we make a training program that could do that uniquely? And as we know, and we've seen from this program, and Alexandra's going to spell out, the exciting opportunity globally is is to really make a mark in industries that are really nascent and they're really at the beginning stages. So how can we shape them in order to have the a podcast industry globally be much more open, much more accessible, and how do we give appropriate laddering to people who really want to be successful? And you can go on. I can't remember if that's the end of my slides, Alexandra. It might be. Oh no, I have at least a couple more. So just go back one. And so again, just to demonstrate another way of looking at it, podcast ecosystem, pretty simple in 2015. Go one further, and you can see for any individual who's entering into the space, this is really confusing. And so as an organization, we feel it's our job to help navigate this. And you can see in the hot pink circles, those are really where PRX is. And so we're pretty well distributed in this map. And it's our job on behalf of the people that we work with and on behalf of the attendees at all of our trainings to help this be less confusing and more accessible. And one of the things about a map like this is that one way to look at it and just say, this is really overwhelming and I'm not sure I could ever be successful. And another way to look at it is to say, healthy ecosystems have lots of parts to them. They have lots of nodes to them. They have lots of entry points. And actually, the more messy of a map this is, the more opportunity there is to enter into a growing and exciting industry. And so I've looked at this map differently over the years. And go ahead, Alexandra, sorry, you're right to go to that next slide, and I'll finish on this, which is I bolded this field building and training because that's actually where we're investing. Our strategic pillars as an organization are we care about stories that are in the public interest a lot. We don't just collect podcasts, we care about those that have an impact. And it's really the desired impact of the maker. We're investing, as you can see in this webinar and other activities that we're doing, is like, how do we build the field in a way that's robust and strong? And how do we also take our unique perspective as a nonprofit of operating in the space to be leaders and to be active? How do we protect privacy? How do we train people so that we feel like they have the equipment to monetize their own shows, whether they're at an institution, whether they're a reporter trying to build their audio skills or something else? So I'm so excited to pass it back to Alexandra for some more deep dive on the Google program.
Yes, thank you so much, Kerri. That's so helpful. I love hearing Kerri talk about the state of the industry, and it kind of dovetails right into what we're working on here, if you'll pardon the PRX pun, quite nicely. But Google Podcast Creator Program really is for us. It's our commitment to that open ecosystem. So if we can think about those maps that Kerri showed us, and you can imagine the difference between the United States audio ecosystem in 2015 and 2021, you can really understand 2022, I guess, why now is the time to act. The podcast industry has really been maturing at hyper speed over just a few years, and these big brands are really starting to invest in emerging markets already. But what we have found with the international creators that we're working with, they really consider a lot of them taking a deal to be the last resort. One team that we had worked with in particular, they detailed this deal that was so exploitative, they didn't even ask how much money was on the table. They're not interested. So what we're seeing that's missing from this investment from a lot of these big corporations and for-profit companies in the emerging ecosystems is an actual investment in the creators. A lot of what's happening there can feel somewhat exploitative, especially in the long-term viability of the project and the creators themselves. And that's something that we can offer as a nonprofit company and through this accelerator in particular. And another important part of this is that meanwhile, all of the decisions basically that are being made in emerging markets are predicated on US based data and US based growth strategies. As I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest problems facing United States United States based creators is that breakout piece, the curatorial piece, how to get your show noticed and how to stand out in a crowded market. In many of these emerging ecosystems, people are not dealing with that. And so what we are really seeing is that people have opportunities to become the leading podcasters of tomorrow. And a lot of other big companies see that potential too. But by acting now, we really believe that we can address these challenges kind of head on before this handful of small companies kind of condemn this open and accessible ecosystem before it even has a chance to flourish. At PRX, we are particularly creator centric. We have years of experience addressing pain points of early stage creators and a proven track record of commitment to that open ecosystem. So, our status as a nonprofit organization as well allows us to be a little more mission driven in our scope. And so, if you go to the next slide, we have really built this successful foundation with Google Podcast Creator Program, or as you see abbreviated here, GPcp rounds 1 and 2. And now we are ready to make a significant impact among independent podcast creators in the global audio ecosystem. We have worked really hard to think back about what we have done. And now I am really proud and excited to say that we are going to be doing it again. We have round 3 of Google Podcast Creator Program that will be launching next week. Our application will be open on Tuesday, March 29th, 2022. And you are hearing that here first. You might have seen that in Hot Pod or on The Verge this morning. But today is our official announcement. So if you have questions about this, feel free to put them in the Q&A. I will answer as many of those as I can. But we are indeed running a new round of the Google Podcast Creator Program. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why we are doing this a little differently this year based on what we've learned. So you heard about everything we learned in years 1 and 2. You heard about the state of the industry from our CEO, Carrie Hoffman. And now I'm going to tell you exactly how Google Podcast Creator Program Round 3 is going to address some of the pain points that we noticed among mid-career podcasters in the international audio community. When we started doing this, one of the big things that we teach in the Google Podcast Creator Program, we have design thinking centric teaching and curriculum. And we always teach our podcasters to create a POV. And that really is a person you can name, a person that you know who the thing you're making is for. And for us, that was for GPcp alum Rhea Hadid. And she encompasses so many of the mid-career podcaster pain points that we see among our alumni. And what we did was we really thought, okay, years 1 and 2 were focused on helping early stage podcasters. And that's awesome. But now at this point, a few years into the program, there are kind of a lot of resources available for early stage podcasters. And what we noticed is that we really had mid-career podcasters who were lacking direct support, specifically around business development and audience growth strategies to level up their show and their brand. We had people graduating the program who were kind of lost as to what they could do next. And we see this huge tier of podcasters who are experiencing maybe some great press or some great traction with organic audience growth, but they are just not getting to the point where their podcast can be their life or figuring out how their brand of their podcast can encompass or fit in with other creative pursuits that they have going on. So Rhea is the co-creator and producer of an awesome podcast. You can see her stage on our alumni page. And she was really needing some direct support and mentorship, not just to help transform her show's momentum into a sustainable business, but also to help think about how she might create something like a network or a company or become a leader in the emerging podcast market that she is a part of in the Middle East, North Africa region. So throughout the program, we kind of collected that data on those bright spots, which we talked about. Those are prime podcast regions. And really, what we want to focus on for this round is supporting podcasters who come through our program who are then going to turn around and develop those emerging podcast markets and create a network of like minded communicators and thinkers in those markets. And in that way, we think about everyone who goes through our program as a future leader in their space. So our creators have gone on to take training and mentorship positions within our program, but also within their own audio communities. And we're going to continue to focus on selecting participants that are interested in investing in their podcast ecosystems and building out those podcast ecosystems so that we can have a direct supporting relationship to those efforts with them. When we talked to, we actually, practiced what we preached again and did a round of empathy interviews with our GPcp alumni from around the world, across the years, across the cohorts. Almost all of them had very, very similar pain points lingering after their training. And this program, round 3, is a direct response to those pain points. So as leaders in this space, we are keenly aware of those challenges and working to address them. And number one, I mentioned before, there's a lack of market data in a lot of these burgeoning podcast ecosystems. I mean, even consider the broadness of Spanish language podcasting versus the relative dearth of data that we have for that. We get a few pages here and there of data about Spanish language podcast listening, and it just totally doesn't at all get at the whole of what's going on. And so we realized that there is a lack of market data that people aren't able to work off like American and US based podcasters are. Um, there's a lack of podcast familiarity and accessibility, in particular with listeners. Listeners in emerging podcast ecosystems may not have had that kind of podcast app on the iPhone moment where everyone in the community is now loud and clear able to get into a podcast or figure out how to access a podcast. From what we have heard in a lot of emerging podcast ecosystems, people are still sharing MP3 files over WhatsApp as a way to communicate a podcast. So that is a major hurdle for international podcast creators. There's also a lack of peer and professional networks and mentorship, not for lack of trying. Everyone who is involved in those communities is trying. There just aren't the same organizational frameworks that there are in a developed ecosystem. And so, in a way, that sounds like a pain point, but I think that's really a hope point, because those things are things that we definitely enable our creators to set up and start thinking about in their own regions. Along those same lines, there's a lack of regional gatherings. In the United States, we have things like Third Coast or Podcast Movement, which I mentioned we'll be at. But there's a lack of those similar regional gatherings in other countries, or there has been historically. There's also, among pretty much all of the mid-career podcasters we talk to, a real lack of knowledge about business growth and sustainability. So people have some idea about how to sustain their podcast. Most podcasters didn't have a very strong idea of how to create, something like a business mission statement or a business plan, or even creating formal budgets for their show. And so we have noticed that there is this real lack of resources for podcasters who are looking to kind of get more into the business of things and make their podcast something a little more viable for them in the long term. And then, of course, a lack of money and capital, especially money and capital without strings attached, money and capital without studios attached or copyright constraints attached or IP concerns. And that is something that we're addressing. And so if we kind of started looking at these pain points and thinking about them as opportunities for growth and ways that we can develop this program to better support specifically a mid-career podcaster cohort of international creators. On the next slide, we really are really good at, if I can say so myself, concept and audience development. That's something we have down over a few rounds of this program. And we have noticed that every single one of our cohort members emerges from the program with a much stronger concept. And I think that they would all agree with that. It's not just that we sit here, apart from them and think that's a better concept. It's more so that everyone who graduates the program feels so much better and stronger and has really refined their concept over the course of the 16-week program, which will now be a 20-week program. We have decided that we are going to create new modules on business development and financial sustainability to support our mid-career podcaster cohort. Whereas the previous kind of rounds of this program involved this a very modular, one-size-fits-all design thinking curriculum, we're still going to be grounding our program in design thinking, and our cohort members are still going to get that. But we are going to create some also more adaptive curriculum that will meet specific needs that our mid-career podcasters are having. And also that will make our program a lot more accessible in many different directions. And that is something that we are working on as well. We're on the third row now, Tony. Our alumni really, we've been highlighting our alumni and promoting our alumni. But in this round of GPcp, we are really going to be focusing on using alumni as a sort of like apprenticeship, mentorship boot camp as well. So we're going to be tapping into our really talented alumni network and letting them return back as mentors now to this new cohort, and really tapping into their skill set and learning from them, just like we did when developing the program. We really want to learn from what they've been seeing on the ground as podcasters in emerging markets. And so we're going to be bringing in more alumni for apprenticeship and training. As I had mentioned, we'll be talking at Podcast Movement Evolutions with James Boo, who is the co-founder and managing editor, I do believe, of Self-Evident. And so that's just one example of how we're going to be involving our alumni in bigger and better ways. Any alumni that's in the room, look out for emails from me. I'll be excitedly asking you to share your knowledge with a new cohort of GPCPs later this year. Finally, in this third round, we're going to be doing a 20-week curriculum with an in-person intensive. So for the past, obviously, year and change, things have been virtual, and we had been using the 16-week curriculum. That curriculum has expanded to make room for new business development strategy and audience growth strategy modules. We also are planning, as a way to address a kind of a lack of market data and a lack of regional gatherings and support emerging market ecosystems, we're going to be doing some kind of pop-up podcast garage, a regional partnership where we have some GPcp alumni and where we have some regional partners. We've already identified some spots, and that's to be announced. But that will be a semi virtual event that people can definitely attend and tune into. That's meant to basically teach some partners in a region kind of how we do what we do and hopefully equip them with the tools to sustain a ecosystem of their own. And then finally, we're going to be developing even more public webinars and evergreen resources like we have all this time, and making sure that we are getting a lot of accessible, open, and free resources up to the site so that people, even if you are not participating in the program, have some visibility into the skills that we are teaching our cohort. Um, I'm taking a quick look at the time and realizing that we are up on it. And I want to go ahead and, before we pop off, send a link through and just kind of remind everyone of kind of what the terms of the program are. So you'll see again our lovely new website, the application page I just sent into the chat. The application will be open from Tuesday, March 29th through Sunday, April 24th. I see a couple questions. There will be 2 info session webinars. So when the application goes live, it'll be live for a little while. We'll let you guys look at it. There's places that you can ask questions online. That's outside the scope of this webinar right now, so I won't be answering any of those questions. But there are a lot of places that you can ask and see those answers to those questions. We have an FAQ page on the website. We also have, and Tony will send a link, we have 2 of the info session webinars. So those are going to happen on April 8th and April 15th. Both are on a Friday. You can submit questions ahead of time. There's a Google form that's linked in there as well. And I'll be answering a lot of questions. Those 2 webinars are specifically just for question answering. So I'll be showing up and I'll be sitting on there for an hour and talking at you and answering all your questions. But for now, a lot of information can be found on that website that I sent through. We've got an FAQ page. Also, I see a couple questions. The PRX webinar account and Stephanie Kuo, who's the director of training, are both answering questions. So I would take their answers as fact as well. And that brings us to the end of this very dense, very packed webinar. I hope that you guys feel like you have learned a little something inside the Google Podcast Creator Program. We covered what we've done in rounds 1 and 2. We covered the state of the industry. And then we talked a little bit about those pain points and what we'll be addressing in, surprise, round 3 of the Google Podcast Creator Program. You're so welcome. I'm seeing some thank yous, and we have a lot of information coming your way. So I'll see you guys probably at one of those informational webinars. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. Thank you, everybody. I'm seeing everyone's thank yous. Thanks.